Thanks for braving the elements. The elements have really worked in our favor up until, what, 30 minutes ago, something like that? But this too shall pass, I'm sure. And, you know, I never feel that I have to tell the audiences at these sessions about the festival and encourage them. But just today I discovered something. I was looking at the program guide and looking what other events might be going on either outside or related, and saw this church service on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock listed. And I said, boy, that'd really be fascinating. That would be an interesting thing to do. I'm usually up by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Maybe I'll take that in. So I guess the lesson I learned is read that program guide. There's a lot of hidden treasures in there that you might overlook if you're only looking at the bigger events that take place in the evening. Not that they should be ignored, and particularly not tonight. Julian Lage is someone I've gotten to know, and we've had conversations before. We've never done one of these. Come on out.
Good.
Julian Lage. We've never done one of these before, so I'm going to get to really dig deep. He's got so much experience and so much of a track record. And you think I'm joking because of his youth, but you've been a professional musician for close to 20 years, right, at this point?
Yeah, just about.
Okay.
I started when I was 5, and I played my first gig when I was 6.
Okay. So as you see, it's no spring chicken. But I want to go back before that,
okay.
And ask you your first memory of the guitar.
First memory of the guitar. Well, when I was a kid, when I was probably 4, Eric Clapton's Unplugged came out on MTV, which my dad was really into, and we owned it on VHS.
Mm-hmm.
And so my father was inspired to get a guitar because of that. And that was kind of my first memory, was watching my dad play around the house, take lessons. We would watch the Eric Clapton thing. He would learn, you know, I think he learned Layla and maybe some other songs of Clapton's. I just thought it was really cool, really, really cool.
So was he teaching you as he was learning? Is that how it started?
Well, I had to beg him. I begged my parents for about a year for a guitar. I'm the youngest of 5 children, so I have 3 sisters and a brother. And I think in a family structure like that, you want your thing. You know, I guess in any family structure, but especially as the baby, I thought, well, if I play guitar, I can hang out with my dad, and that'll be cool.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents said if I still wanted a guitar when I was 5, they would get me one. And so, sure enough, I still did more than ever. And at that point, my dad got me a Fender Stratocaster, beautiful guitar. I still have it at home. And he was so hip. He had a few things that just philosophies kind of embedded in me early, which was that if it was an electric guitar, people would think it's loud and it's rock, you know. He thought it would be easier on my hands and I'd be more likely to keep playing, which was true. So he got me an electric guitar, an amplifier, and then he started taking lessons seriously so that he could come home and teach me. Okay. We did that for about a year. So.
Now, guitar, I think of as almost the universal instrument. I mean, it's played in so many different cultures. It's played in so many different kinds of music. So you really had the world of music open to you.
Yeah.
And was the goal then to play like Eric Clapton, or did you start hearing other music at that point?
Well, it was kind of. I was obsessed with Eric Clapton, Muddy Waters, T-Bone Walker, Stevie Ray Vaughan, all the blues greats.
And these are things you just heard?
I just heard. They were either on TV, or I remember seeing Stevie Ray Vaughan on Austin City Limits as a kid, or my parents had a lot of their records. But they were also my father was really into, both my parents into James Taylor and John Martin, a great singer from the UK. They're really into Joe Beam, specifically this record Passerine, which is kind of unusual and very produced and later in his life, and I love it. And then they had...
That's one with his children on it?
I think so. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of choir singing. And then they had Coltrane's Giant Steps. And between the blues guitar, the Brazilian stuff, the songwriter stuff, and Giant Steps, that was the first few years of my musical awareness.
Okay. But you must have, to steal a phrase from Coltrane, been taking giant steps on the instrument if you were out there performing publicly that quickly. I mean, did you or did your family realize early on, wow, Julian, he's got an affinity for what's happening here?
I guess so. It's very hard to have perspective for me because I feel like I blacked out until about age 12.
Okay.
And then I woke up and I was like, oh my God, I'm on tour and this is my life. But prior to that, I don't remember a whole lot. So I remember being at a guitar store with my dad, and I was playing with, who was it? Guitars for Huey Lewis. I can't believe I'm blanking on it. Anyway.
Any Huey Lewis fans can
Anybody?
help us out?
I'll look it up
All right,
later.
go Google him, see what you can
Let's
find.
see what you can find. Well, Huey Lewis's band was all very Bay Area based, and I grew up in Santa Rosa, just north of San Francisco. Anyway, I was at a guitar store. I was probably 7 or 8, and I remember my father watching me play with this guitar player, and we were just playing blues and just kind of talking about guitars, and he seemed interested in me and whatnot. And my father excused himself, and he went outside. This was pre-cell phones, and he called my mom on a payphone and said, he told me this years later, you know, but he said to my mom, he said, I think something's different about this whole thing. You know, she said, well, what do you mean? He said, something's different. Like, we should be prepared for something different to happen. And again, I wasn't that, I just practiced and I played and I learned, and it was in my nature then, and kind of just in my nature in general if something seems challenging, I'm more inclined to do, and if something seems, not desirable, like practicing many hours a day, I'll do it. Just I want to see if I can, I'm kind of interested in that. So I guess something was up, but I really owe it to my parents. I mean, they're so supportive.
Well, I was going to say, and I don't know if it's the case today, but quite often at these sessions, I will see parents bring their young children who are starting on an instrument. I know that was the case Friday when Regina Carter was here. There was a 7-year-old who had gotten a violin. Oh, cool. And, you read biographies of a lot of musicians, and you hear about how their parents, for one reason or another, either thought it was sinful to play music, or you'd be in poverty your whole life, or whatever. There are a million reasons to tell people don't become an artist, don't become a musician. But you obviously had the support of your parents.
I had the support, and there were a few factors. Being, in my family, everyone did something creative. Everyone was kind of into design or writing or, sciences. I think of as very creative too. My father, as a young boy, was kind of a prodigious artist, visual artist. He had one-man shows when he was 12, and was just kind of a badass then, and he still is. And my mother is a force of nature in terms of her aesthetic and her sense of design, especially with regard to homes and spaces. So there was definitely, I wasn't the odd one. It was kind of like, oh yeah, come along. We're all trying to get better at the things we care about. Additionally, I think there was a great benefit to being good at something at a young age before YouTube existed, and things that were maybe potentially exploitative. No one knew about me, for a very long time, and that was very deliberate. My parents had a kind of a brilliant way of getting me in touch with people who could teach me, who would be healthy to be around, but they also kept me away from a lot of things that might have been a little bit either overwhelming or detrimental, or put me in a position where I felt I had no choice. So they were very, very open-minded.
Well, I know one of the first musicians that you began to play with who had some, stature internationally was Dave Grisman.
Yeah, sure.
And can you talk about meeting him and playing with him? Everybody's familiar with David Grisman, I'm sure. Okay.
Yeah, David's a staple of the Bay Area. I was at a guitar show with my dad. I was probably 10 years old, and it was a vintage guitar show when everyone brings their old things, and we play and hang out. And I spotted Grisman, and I think I just walked over to him and just said, "Hi, nice to meet you. I'm a fan." I don't know. Sometimes I think I had more courage as a little kid than I do now, but I just was kind of fearless, and maybe he had heard about me through a friend or something, and we sat down and played for a couple hours, and it was great. And then when I was 11, he asked me to record on a duo record with him. He had a collection of duos. And that was my first professional recording. And I didn't realize how special that was until years later. I mean, hanging out with Grisman, there was a couple things at play. One was that you would hang out with him and play dog music, which was kind of his hybrid of jazz and bluegrass and Americana and folk music. I was also exposed to a lot of vintage instruments, and it kind of seemed he would send me home with the most ridiculous, valuable things that I think scared my parents a lot because they would have to figure out their insurance policy should anything happen. But I had all these old guitars. I thought, well, that's normal. So you know, people, you make your own kind of music. That's cool. You play old instruments, cool. And also, he would take me around to hang out with musicians when they'd come to town. So I remember being 10 or 11 and going to play with Doc Watson backstage. Wow. Or go play with Bela, or go see Del McCurry's band and be with them. And it was just kind of everything. I was definitely not a bluegrass musician, but it was okay to be a jazz guy on the outskirts who liked acoustic music. And I didn't realize how valuable that was until much later.
What were you thinking of yourself in these terms back then, as being a jazz guy or a bluegrass guy?
I was.
So what in your
in my head
when you met Grisman? What were you?
I was the ultimate jazz nerd that you could find. Okay. I wanted to know every Riverside recording, every Blue Note recording. I wanted to know everything there was to know about the music, and it made me feel kind of special. Like, oh, I've got this thing, and I've got this vocabulary, and I have a propensity for it. But aesthetically, my heart was always kind of headed towards acoustic music.
Okay.
And Grisman helped foster that.
So I know another important early meeting was with Gary Burton.
Sure.
And maybe you could talk about that experience.
Yeah, of course. Well, Gary is so dear to my heart. I met Gary, I was 12. Was I 12? 12 years old. And I played on the Grammys, on the telecast. And I got a letter about 2 weeks after the telecast. And it was from Gary, and he just said, "Hey, I was in the audience. I really enjoyed it. And would you have any interest in playing with me at the TED conference?" Which, the TED conference now is kind of blown up, but it used to be. It was always pretty special, but it was very small, and it was always in Monterey, California. And he said, "If I know you're in the area, would you like to play with me?" So of course, we called, and we left his phone number, and we had this great conversation about everything. And we did the gig. I remember it was just trio. It was Vibes, guitar, and Jim Kerwin on bass, who played with David Grisman's quintet, still does. And then Herbie Hancock sat in for part of it. That was like my first gig with Gary. And at the TED conference, and I loved it. It went great, and we just kind of hit it off. And he said, "Okay, because that went well, would you like to do this tour?" Or you can't really call it a tour. It was on the Queen Elizabeth II from New York to London, the cruise ship. And it was.
And you're 12 years old?
I was 12, yeah. And he said, this went so well, would you like to come on? I remember it was our band and Tommy Flanagan Trio and Bud Shank's band and all these. It was great. And that went so well. And then a few months after that, "Oh, well, would you like to do this other tour?" So from the time I was 12 until about 15 or so, Gary would always find excuses, and he's so busy. And at that time, he was at Berklee touring, but he would always kind of make up a reason, like, "Oh, we could go to the, some like secondary market so that I can play with Jules." So we did that. Then we made a record when I was 15 with Makoto Zone and James Genus and Clarence Penn. And then when I was 17 or so, we started the Next Generations band, which was more of a proper band, toured for a couple years. And then more recently, we had a quartet with Antonio Sanchez and Scott Cawley. But again, I found myself, first with Grisman, who made it seem very normal to fuse worlds together. Then with Gary, who's made it seem extremely normal and did it in such an elegant way to bring all his influences together. And I just go, wow, what a great way to grow up,
Now, I know that people who've worked with Gary, when I talk to them about it, they not only talk about the musical influence, but just his influence as how to be a professional musician, lead a band.
Yeah.
And for instance, Makoto told me that when he was playing with him, he came to Gary's house and said, "I'm going to buy my first car. Could you give me some advice?" And Gary said, "Well, yeah, but let me come with you. I want to make sure my vibes fit in the trunk." Okay. So
that's funny coming from Gary, because when he was a young man, he had a little Triumph. I think it was a Spitfire, right. And he had a trailer hitch on the back so he could pull the vibes with them. So he knows about being impractical.
But I was going to ask if you have any stories about not directly musical influences, about just being a pro or being a band leader that you took away from the experience with Gary. Still having the experience.
No, you nailed it. I mean, anyone who works with Gary knows that it's, a certain proportion is wow, he's one of the greatest musicians ever and improvisers. And to watch him play great night after night after night is it's pretty humbling. There's never a time where I'm not thinking, God, someday I want to get there. It's astounding. On the professional business side, I wish I had like a really good, juicy anecdote to tell you, but it's my life with him has been just filled with them. Everything from how you book travel to how you interact with a promoter to how you deal with your finances to how do you fire a band member? How do you create a set list? How do you, just how do you carry yourself in the world as a musician? It's really funny because I think it's assumed often that if you are good at playing music, then you have the whole thing together. And a lot of what defines a person's career in music is often kind of the weight that they carry with their profession. There are the musicians who are kind of apologetic, and that's okay. And I certainly can fall into that category a lot. Then there are ones who are overly confident who just think, well, this doesn't match. They think they're better than everybody, but they're not. And they treat people poorly, and that's not correct. And then right smack dab in the middle is you have Gary, who knows his value. He knows the weight that his presence carries, and he uses it more responsibly than I've seen anyone use anything they ever had. So if there's a takeaway, it's to just check yourself. Are you leaning towards, are you bearing what's good about you? Are you being coy? Mm-hmm. Are you being overly confident? And when you find that balance, the other systems at play, such as running a career, they seem to kind of fall into place.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure Gary was very influential in your decision to come to Boston and Berklee.
He
but
was.
what were the options when high school was over? What else did you have in mind?
Well, my schooling was so weird as a kid. I mean, I'm very, very lucky. I grew up in Northern California, right? So keep that in mind. So I was in fourth grade, and the school district came to my parents and said, we really think Julian should not be going to school full time because we can tell he has a propensity for music, and it'd be best if we don't have a music program, is what they're saying. So if you can facilitate him studying, whether it be going to a conservatory or teachers will help you with that. And my parents said, no, we've got 4 other children, and they're turning out fine, and Julian needs to be no different. And then they kind of kept saying, but really, we think this would be, we don't want him to miss school. So, okay, so I ended up in an independent study program where I went to school part-time and then practiced went to school 2 days a week, then practiced 11 hours a day for the rest of the week. That was my life until high school. And then at high school, I thought, okay, I want to have the high school experience. My parents said, you're going to hate it. Like, you don't realize what your life's been like. I said, no, yeah, but I want to have friends and this and that. And okay, whatever. So I went for about a day. And I went for about almost a year, not even a year. I thought, oh, God, this is awful. I have no time to do anything that's important to me. So I went to junior college and got most of my college credits done. And by the time I was about, when was that, 17 or so. So when it came to going to college, I had a little bit of time to think about it, and I was pretty sure about Berklee as the only choice, to be honest. Gary wasn't there anymore. He had retired. But I had actually a passion to be a film composer. That's what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, Berklee's got the best program. I know people there. I had already, I remember going to Berklee and teaching a master class when I was 13. And
so it wasn't like the guitar lessons were the primary thing you were looking
Mick Goodrick, it was. I mean, Mick Goodrick, if you don't know, is, one of the ultimate guitar gurus. And I knew he was teaching at Berklee, and I knew that was maybe something to jump on now, and rather than waiting too long. So I really only applied to Berklee. I said, well, if I get in and I get a scholarship, I'll go, and if not, I'll figure something out. And I went for about a semester, and I hated it. And I called the president, Roger Brown. I said, you are wonderful, and you've been so kind to me, but I have 0 time to do anything I hope to do. Thank you very much. I left this in a voicemail. Again, the things I can't believe I did in my life. And he called me right back. It was like on a Friday night. He called me at 9 p.m. and said, whoa, wait, I got your message. But really, what is it that you want? I said, well, look, you've got so many great teachers, so many different instruments. My goal would be to come out of Berklee with my first record. That seems like I want some buffer room. I need some help. I want to study classical piano. I want to study classical composition. And I want to study with Mick Goodrick. And that was surprisingly hard to do given the structure of an entering student. Yeah. And he said, okay, you can do all those things. So my first record, which is called Sounding Point, was my final to graduate. And so I really created a kind of similar to elementary school. I created my own system, and I don't think that could have really happened anywhere but Berklee.
Well, I was going to ask about, when you went there, you had already been touring and on the road and this and that. So did you feel a draft from any of the other students? Like, this guy must have a big head?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I mean, I'm sure, who knows what they said about me, but I didn't. I was a hermit. I went to class and I practiced and I practiced and I practiced. And so there wasn't, there's kind of two paths in a school like that. You can really say, I want to be social and play with everybody's band, but at a certain point it can kind of be it can suck all the energy out of you learning other people's music. So I stayed under the wire. I had a couple friends who I still keep in touch with, and otherwise, I don't think anyone really cared about me, which is great. And I just was really focused, so it worked out well.
Now, I want to talk a little about the evolution of the ensemble situations you find yourself in.
Sure.
Because when we met,
Yeah.
you had formed a band. It was a quintet, and it was a very unusual quintet.
Right.
And you made a couple of albums with that band. And talk a little about the concept of the band and the sound and what you were going for then.
Oh, gladly. Yeah, so I had a band. It was a Julian Lage group, and it was guitar, tenor sax, originally alto sax, but eventually tenor, guitar, sax, cello, bass, and percussion. And the way that came together was kind of by accident. I was coming out of Berklee, and I had a record deal with MRC, which was part of Universal, and I didn't have a band, and they wanted to record about 2 months from this point of signing the contract. I said, well, okay. So I started thinking about all the things I didn't want. That was kind of, I started on that side. So I said, well, I don't want a traditional drum set because there's certain frequencies with cymbals. I think that'll clash, will make me play louder than I want to. I'd love to write counterpoint. I think I need a cello. I think maybe sax and cello. I just kind of constructed it by accident. I started with the drummer and the bass player. And I said, do you know a cello player? And they said, yes. Here's the number. Cool, that he was in the band. And, a saxophone player, cool, he's in the band. So what I found myself dealing with was a band that functioned kind of as a chamber ensemble in the sense that we had nothing in common. We couldn't sit down and play Autumn Leaves because we had a classical musician, we had an improvising percussionist. I mean, some of us had jazz backgrounds, but it forced me to write the music that would facilitate us really being together. And it went great. We did a couple records. I have to say it was very challenging at a certain point because I realized I kind of, the least appropriate instrument in that band was guitar. And I caught this a few years into it. I said, why am I struggling so much? Why is this? Because, saxophone will cut acoustically. Cello can cut acoustically. Guitar would be the perfect rhythm instrument in a band like that. But I was struggling with some things business-wise where I thought, well, I want to be the Julian Lage group. It was my idea. Therefore, I should be out front kind of leading this. But in so many ways, I can see now I kind of I made it harder on myself than maybe I needed to.
Well, I recall, and I think it was around the time the last group record came out, so maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Something like that.
That we spoke, and you had just started playing duets with some musicians who weren't the typical kind of people you'd expect a quote-unquote jazz guitar player to play with. So from there, you seem to have evolved into the uber duo player because,
I think so.
1 minute you're playing with Mark O'Connor, and then you're playing with Nels Cline, and then you're playing with Fred Hirsch. I mean, that's a gamut in itself. But talk about how that phase has developed.
You nailed it. I mean, you drew the connection beautifully. It was like I was used to something that, as wonderful as it was, and as much as I love the guys in my band, and we still keep in touch, it was laborious in this way, where it was kind of like, if we can't get all behind this concept, then it's going to fail. There's a weightiness. And like everything in life, it runs a course. And as soon as I commit, I kind of surrender. I said, fine, let's do one last tour and we'll be done. I started to have opportunities. Playing with Fred Hirsch was a really important one. He said, let's do this duo show. Okay, that one, well, let's do this other duo show. Let's do a duo tour. Let's do a duo record. I used to go to, Jim Hall had these monthly luncheon invitationals. I was very, very.
I bet there were
very
good
lucky.
restaurants.
It was always the French Roast on 11th Street in New York. It's a block from his house. He could walk there. In my life, I've been really, really, really blessed to grow up around Jim Hall, and then in the last few years to play with him and just be his friend. And we would have these meetings, and it was always the crew was usually Jim, myself, Scott Cawley, Chris Potter, Dave Binney, Adam Rogers, and then Nels Klein came in. Sometimes Steve Laspina, just all friends, people he liked. And I met Nels, this great rock guitar player and improvising musician.
He plays with Wilco.
Yeah, he's the guitarist in Wilco, and he's just tremendous. We met at one of these gym lunches where I said, "Oh, Nels, good to see you," and we're talking, and then from that day forth, we kind of fell in love musically. We thought, "Oh, you're into this, you're into that, cool, let's play." And we did our first gig together. Now, Nels' world is a little more avant-garde, and I have to say, playing our first show together, where a lot of it's improvised and, you know, anything goes, was the first time in my life I really felt like I had found my people in this way. And I don't know how to describe it other than things that I used to do or will do in ensembles always felt they felt silly or extraneous at times, but they never felt silly or extraneous to me. They felt like their own, there's a logic to it. So Nels, in a lot of ways, gave me permission to be a weirdo and realize that there's integrity in that. Yeah. And then in the irony of it is, for me, it's the project that I think is so out, and it's often the one that feels the most accessible to people. If I want to say, this is what I do, it's like, it's all there. Simultaneously, I started doing this bluegrass duet with Chris Eldridge, guitarist in the band Punch Brothers. Chris and I, it goes by Critter, by the way. So Critter and I have been playing, we play our old Martins around one mic, and I sing harmonies, and he sings songs, and we just play bluegrass and old acoustic music. And I love that. It's heavenly, you know. I'm trying to think of any other duos. Oh, and then there's one other duo that I focus a lot, which is called, it's a band duo, and it's called Rude Ruth. And it's with Margaret Glaspie, a brilliant songwriter who I've grown up playing with and working together. And I play all Telecaster and play with pedals and effects. So I fostered kind of 4 or so different projects that all mean something to me, and they kind of add up. And I'm just getting to a point where I'm now dying to have a band, and I'm really eager to play solo guitar.
Okay, let me stay with duo for a minute, because
Please.
As diverse as, you know, Nels Klein and Fred Hirsch might be, there's a commonality. It's a one-on-one conversation.
Sure.
So I wonder if there is a duo mindset that you carry to all of these encounters.
Oh, that's a good question. I think so. I mean, if you look at, you know, Jim Hall was a great duo player, and he would do duets with everybody, and it always worked. Even when it, you know, whether it be with him with Bill Evans, or him with Lee Konitz, or him with Charlie Hayden, or Ron Carter, or Michelle Petrucciani, it was like, this guy gets how to have a conversation, and that's just how he was as a person. Fred Hirsch too has tons of duos. You know, I mean, there's a few that he really fosters, but he commonly has a week or 2 in New York every April.
And he always has singers.
Always has singers, exactly.
Yeah.
He really, and nothing's off limits. So I don't know if I have anything specific that I bring to it. Usually I'm pretty in love with the other person. That's kind of the premise. I just look at them and go, wow, you're cool, you know, and how could I possibly fit into this? And then you find a way, you know. But that's I like duos where you, especially as a guitarist, I won't get too nerdy about guitar, because I don't know how many of you care about this.
Well, we'll find out when we open the floor.
We'll find out a little bit. But guitar, you know, the history of guitar is really interesting. I'm fascinated with kind of pre-bebop guitar. There was kind of a period at the turn of the century in the 20s and 30s where guitar was coming out of tenor banjo, and it was jazz. It was kind of coming out of, there's some like folk and country connections to some of these songs. Anyway, it was like the Wild West. And the guitar was utilized as a guitar. Open strings, big chords. It wasn't hip yet to be like a saxophone player. And then the bebop era came in, and that became very desirable. And you had Charlie Christian, and you had Wes Montgomery, all these people that obviously, you know, kicked a lot of ass. I feel like we're at the turn of the century again, in a lot of ways, where it's time to kind of uncover what the guitar does if you just look at it. You know, what's the default? What default stuff happens? And all these duos let me do that. I mean, with Fred, one of the funny things, Fred's a very orchestral piano player. And when I first started playing with him, I was very polite. And, I'd be like, I see an opening that's this big, and I'll play this one note, And I realized, I listened back, and I thought I just sounded really weak. I thought, God, he's pointing out that he's got this whole instrument. I'm somehow downplaying the impact of 6 strings and however many frets. So I said, well, to hell with it. And I started kind of just playing too much and playing lots of things. And it was only then that we kind of got a sound that I think we were really happy with. So unapologetically orchestral is kind of my dream scenario as a guitar player these days.
Okay. You told me that you're really looking forward to playing solo.
Yeah.
Is it now? I mean, solo. Every musician plays solo because when you're practicing,
You're by yourself.
That's
That's true.
square ground, zero, if you will.
Exactly.
But have you been doing a lot? Is it a new aspect of what you're doing?
It's new. Are you all coming to the show tonight? Okay, cool. Oh yeah, great. Well, I'm thrilled. I mean, I was deathly afraid of solo guitar for most of my life, and mainly it was because I felt like I didn't see an angle in. I saw people who did a lot of fingerstyle things that were really virtuosic, but I didn't really relate to that. And then I could, I'd hear some people play like Mary Halverson or somebody who can, or like Nels Cline, people with these sonic worlds I love. But I kind of never heard someone with one guitar and one mic do what I was craving. So I thought, well, then if they're not doing it, it must not be, it must not be doable. And then I kind of fell down this rabbit hole of Julian Bream and Segovia and some of the great guitarists, Ida Presti and whatnot of the 20th century. I thought, you know what? Just again, it's like being a kid. Like if someone says I can't do it, I'm going to see if I can. And I've played a handful of solo shows in my life, and they're usually comprised of standards and kind of improvised things. However, I'm making a record of this music later this month, and I already made the record. I'm kind of amongst my friends notorious for making records and then throwing them out. A lot of the records that
making them over again?
Yeah,
okay.
There's the Fred Hirsch record, that's the second record. The Gladwell record with my band, that's the second record. So I went into the studio kind of like, oh, I hope I get this right the first time. This was months ago. I wrote all this music, recorded for 4 days, and I listened to it, and I thought, it could be better. And I thought the format was so compelling that I thought I need to focus on getting these songs, getting the lengths, getting yada, yada, yada together. So as I am here today, this kind of marks the beginning of really trying to pursue solo guitar with original compositions. I have a few, what do you call them? Not attributes. I have a few things that I'm dealing with. I have a guitar in standard tuning, a guitar with a capo. Those are 2, and then the third would be a guitar tuned down a whole step. Those are my 3 parameters. That's the word. Okay. And so I set out to write a body of music that's about 45 minutes long that features those elements and gives me an excuse to go around and play for people that's kind of unencumbered.
Okay. I want to throw this open to questions, but I want to ask you one thing because you talked about being so self-critical.
Yeah.
And I know this is a problem that many musicians face, that if you leave it to them, they will never be satisfied.
Yeah.
And have you found ways to deal with that?
To cope with that? Well, tell people if you feel, suicidal, or if you feel like your life you're depressed and you can't figure it out because you feel like you suck. That's the time to stop consulting yourself for opinions. That's what I've learned. So I still feel just as self-critical as any time, but if I think, oh God, this sucks, and if I say that enough times in a sitting, I'll go, let me call my parents and see, let's see what they think.
Mike Stern told me once, I asked him why he always had other musicians produce his albums. And he said, because they'll say that's good enough. Go ahead.
Oh, that's
and if it were up to me, I would just keep working on the same
go to
piece,
hell.
Yeah.
It's true. But I have to say, if you're in a creative endeavor, there are things that only you will know. You'll only know when they're correct, and no one else can read your mind. And I used to kind of pretend I'd run up against these things, not get what I wanted. Someone else would say, "You're fine, just keep going," and I'd kind of just think, "Well, maybe I didn't really want that." And I'm starting to get to a point where I go, if I wanted it, I wanted it. Maybe I just don't have the best way to get there. So I'll fight for it, but try to solicit help.
Okay. Well, I'm going to solicit help.
Yeah.
Starting back there.
Yeah. Hi.
Do you practice as much as you used to, and
No.
has your routine changed?
Yes. I don't practice as much as I used to. Mostly it's just because the nature of life, you know. I have focused things I have to get ready for. If it's this gig, I'll practice. You know, if I can get an hour of practice, that's great. This last week I've been writing a lot of music, and they were long days, 12-hour days for about 7 days of just writing, pencil and paper, very minimal guitar. But it's kind of modular. It's take it as it comes. And usually as soon as one gig ends, preparation for the next project begins, especially since I kind of live in the bluegrass realm and the jazz realm. Those are two very different hats for me, and I have to switch. So one of the fun things about being a kid and practicing was that it was very stream of consciousness based. So I'd say, you know, oh, I want to learn this West Montgomery thing. So I'd start learning, and I go, oh God, I'm really awful at this type of picking or whatever. So then I'd go, let me try this picking. Oh, you know what would help that picking is these etudes. Oh, that'd be cool. And you know, this harmonics thing in the etudes reminds me of this film score. Let me say this. And I would do these. I mean, it's funny. Mick Goodrick used to say you could follow these cycles, and usually by the end of the day, you'll get back to West Montgomery or whoever you started with. So even though I don't have the same amount of time, I try to start a cycle, get lost in it, and then end up there. That's even if I have 10 minutes. Way in the back.
Oh, go on.
I'm not a jazz aficionado at all, but I first heard you not very long ago on Mountain Stage.
Oh yeah.
What were you doing on Mountain Stage?
I was playing. I don't know. They called me up. Mountain Stage is pretty diverse. They have kind of acoustic musicians. They have some jazz musicians. You're right. It's weird that I was on there. Oh, I'm so glad.
And I'm curious to hear you say something about that.
That record?
Recording and playing with those guys.
Well, the record Gladwell that she refers to, it was a record, the second record I made with that band I talked about with cello, and we set out to make somewhat of a concept record where I envisioned a set of songs that resembled geographic locations. You know, so you'd have a song that was kind of like, you know, the entrance to a town, like the gatekeeper, kind of this 70-foot tall guy who protects the city. What music would go with him? What music would go with the serene, kind of more spiritual quarters of the town, whether that be a church or a synagogue, whatever it is. And so it was a grand experiment to see, with these parameters, would we write differently? And in a lot of ways, it helped to take the focus off of the nitty-gritty of how do we make cello work with sax, with guitar, how do we fit in this? It just kind of wiped the slate clean, and we came up with a handful of songs, recorded them, and we did that record once, and same thing, made it perfect. Like everything was in tune, everything was in time, and I heard it, and I hated it. Because I'm not in tune, and I don't play perfectly often. So we went back and basically redid, we took 4 days to make the first record, used almost all of Universal's budget, and then threw it out, and then made the whole record in about a day, just playing it live. And I thought, well, that's better. It's what I wanted. And anyway, that was the experience with that project.
Was there a question or?
I had the pleasure of seeing something you played on YouTube. And the song is one I adore, and I think of it as a singer's song.
Oh.
What version of The Best Thing for You Would Be Me drew you to that song, which nobody seems to do much?
Best Thing for You Would Be Me. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Jim didn't record it, did he? Jim Hall?
May well have.
If he did, then that would have been the version. If not, I think it's because Mick Goodrick taught it to me. He taught it to me in school, and I always loved it. But yeah, you're right. It is a total singer song. But it's so good, and it's just a little more sophisticated than most standards. If you don't know the song, The Best Thing for You Would Be Me, it's really lovely. And it starts a half step below the tonic, and the bridge is kind of loopy, and I don't know, it's enough to keep me entertained.
And your use of counterpoint on that is so unlike most jazz guitar approaches.
Oh, wow.
Just gorgeous.
Thank
I hope
you.
you don't not play it tonight, as I mentioned.
I wasn't planning on. Maybe I'll have to fit it in.
And if not, apparently you can find it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
exactly. I'm covered.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a guitar player, and I've been a little bit conflicted in my practice recently because I'm studying with two different guitar teachers. One who's constantly handing me sheets of paper saying, sight read this, memorize this real book tune, learn this arrangement. And the other one is saying, throw that paper away, learn everything by ear, transcribe, or not transcribe. He doesn't want me writing it down, but learn and play by ear. So I was wondering if you could speak to the pros and cons
Oh
of
my
each approach.
That's a great question. Did everyone catch wind of that? I'm not going to make your life easier if I answer this. I think, I never transcribed things growing up, mainly because I was lazy. I would do this thing where I would listen to a solo and go, wow, that makes me feel this way. Let me see if I can play a solo that makes me feel that way. And I would do it, and I wouldn't feel that way. Well, okay, let me listen to it again, and then I do. And now let me play it until I feel it. And I would do this for hours until I kind of got some version of what I got from it. Maybe I'm similar to you in the respect that I think there's something attractive about being very technical and having sheets and being a good student and being like, look, I checked it off the list. I know everything and every key, and what could possibly get in my way now? And then, so my brain is happy when I'm doing those things. And I know people who that would bog them down and they need to do it all by ear. And I'm like that too, but I kind of bounce between both. I would say neither of those really matter at all unless there's a reason you're studying guitar in the first place, or if there's you're gaining this information, you're looking at these understandings because there's something, I guess, in you that needs to come out, So I would say with that in mind, pick and choose whatever facilitates you being amazing at what you want to be doing. But you have to pick and choose. I don't do well with homework. If someone was like, learn these sheets and get it. I would go along with it. Now I kind of glaze over and I go, well, maybe they're not for me. And, so pick what works and leave the rest, and don't worry about your teacher's feelings in that respect. They just want you to be happy. Any other questions?
Anybody else?
They can be guitar nerdy questions too. I'm happy. Yeah.
Guitar nerdy. What instruments will you be playing this evening?
I'll be playing 2 guitars tonight, not at the same time, but my main guitar is a 1939 Martin 0018. It's my favorite guitar. And then there's I wanted to borrow another guitar to keep in a whole step down. So I think it's one of Paul Asbell's guitars. I think it's a 1934 single 018. So 30s Martins. That's kind of my favorite thing in the world.
Anybody else? No? Okay.
That's fine.
Well, I always get very excited when a musician comes to play here with an ensemble that I like. Oh,
Yeah,
great.
of course.
But when someone I enjoy hearing comes and say, I have something new to do, then that's like the cherry on a hot fudge sundae.
Oh, I appreciate that.
And so I think we're going to have a special treat tonight, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm sure I'll see everybody back here at 8 o'clock, and I hope I see you all again tomorrow at 5:30 when we'll be talking with Jeff Keyser.
Oh, that'd be
Thank
great.
you for coming out.
Thank
and
you all
thank
so
you,
much.
Julian.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.